Midnight Moon. Written by Suzana Thompson. Narrated by Sarah Sampino. Chapter 15. You broke up with him? Taylor asked after hearing about my confrontation with Damien. We were never a couple, I exclaimed. We never even went on one real date. But what about him being in love with me? I finished bitterly. He's got a strange way of showing it. Anyway, he's never said anything like that. I don't think that Bryce's theory is true. There's probably some other reason she couldn't control him, like him being a stubborn dumbass. Do you think he's still planning to go through with it? Taylor questioned, referring to his plot to kill Kristen. I shrugged. He said it was almost time, but I don't know if he'll really be able to do it, especially if they've... Her eyes widened dramatically. You think they've slept together? It's possible, I said, finally facing facts. You heard her say that sex was the way to get to him. But he couldn't, she sputtered. If he loves you, he couldn't. It was different with Bryce, because he... My own eyes grew wide with comprehension as she trailed off. She slept with Bryce? Yes, Taylor told me sadly. But he was in love with her, and he thought that she loved him. He said that she's the only girl he's ever been with, and that he was her first too. Really? I asked, because she sure acts experienced. Yeah, she agreed. But she used to be a lot more shy. It's only lately that she's been... Since she turned into a werewolf, I interrupted with my realization. It's changed her and made her more aggressive. Bryce said that it doesn't change your personality. Whatever she is now was already there, Taylor explained. She just stopped hiding it. I thought about how Damien had acted after he became a werewolf. It seemed to have magnified certain aspects of his personality, but having seen his behavior over the past few years, I knew that those traits were already part of him. Damien said that he feels strong and free when he's the wolf, I remembered. Hence Kristen's revved-up confidence, Taylor stated. We were both silent then, thinking about her. Why do you think she killed her sister? I asked. I was just thinking about that, Taylor said. There's no reason for it that I can see. I know she killed Blair so she could have Damien, but I can't imagine why she'd want to kill a baby. That was the most disturbing part of it. Killing Blair just so she could have her boyfriend was pretty twisted, but killing a defenseless little baby was creepy and demented. When I thought about it that way, she did seem like an evil monster that should be destroyed. Yet I still didn't want Damien to be the one to kill her. Despite all his flaws, there was a lot of good in him, and I didn't want the bad to overtake the good. Unfortunately, all of our options seemed bad. I can't wait for Bryce's mom to get here, I said, pinning all my remaining hope on her. Taylor sighed in response. I hope she can fix this. The full moon was on a Sunday this month, so Bryce's mom arrived on Saturday. She was as blonde and blue-eyed as her son, but she was quite a bit shorter than him. That didn't stop her from being an intimidating presence. Where's Damien? Mrs. Mitchell snapped after we had all been introduced to her. He's, not really part of... Bryce began. He's consorting with the enemy, I cut in. Don't worry, I assured her sarcastically. He's got it all under control, whining and dining her and such. Everybody else looked away uncomfortably, while Mrs. Mitchell studied me with an assessing gaze. He's got a plan, I continued carelessly, feeling like I was close to losing it now that the dreaded day had arrived. It'll be okay, Clarissa, Daphne consoled me. Her soft voice snapped me out of my near hysteria. Looking over at her, I suddenly felt ashamed. Anybody could now tell that she was sick. She'd lost even more weight from her already thin frame, and she looked pale and tired. I'd asked her if she'd made a decision yet, but she'd told me we'd talk about it after we dealt with the problem with Kristen. I want to see how that turns out first, she'd stated firmly, ending the discussion. What's your plan? Taylor now asked hesitantly. Are you going to kill Kristen? Bryce's mom turned her attention from me to Taylor. Only as a last resort. Killing a human being is as abhorrent to us as it is to the rest of society. It's too dangerous to allow a rogue wolf to run loose, however, so I might have to go to that course if my plan fails. What is your plan? Bryce repeated Taylor's question. You don't need to be involved, she told him. The reason I wanted to meet with all of you is to warn you to stay home tomorrow night. All of you, she stressed with a hard look at Bryce. But I can help, he protested. At least tell me what you're planning to do. Like you told me? Her sharp question made him look down at the floor in shame. You didn't seek my counsel before you made the biggest decision of your life. You know how permanent this is, and why we wait until people are mature enough to handle the change. Now you've unleashed this psychotic girl on innocent people, and she's turned another rash young man, giving us even more to worry about. This isn't helping, Taylor exclaimed. Stop yelling at Bryce. He didn't know that Kristen was a psycho, and he feels bad enough about it already. Can't you see how upset he is? We were all startled by her outburst, but Bryce gazed at her with such a tender look that it made me smile despite the circumstances. His mom seemed unmoved by his obvious affection for Taylor and watched them warily. We're all upset, she acknowledged. But I have my reasons for not involving you in this. Just trust me that it will be finished tomorrow night, one way or another. None of us were reassured as we left Bryce's apartment. His mom was staying with him while she was in town, and I felt sorry for him, being stuck there in that tense situation. I was even more concerned about Daphne, because she appeared to be feeling even worse now. She looked like she barely had enough strength to stand as we walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Are you okay? I asked, even though she clearly wasn't. Yeah, she replied weakly. I just need to go home. Taylor and I glanced at each other worriedly. Daphne had been in the best mood we'd seen her in for a while when we'd picked her up to go to Bryce's place. She'd even made plans to go out to lunch with us afterwards, but she made no mention of that now. She doesn't look good, Taylor commented after we dropped Daphne off at home. Yeah, I agreed. It looks like she's getting worse. Poor Daphne, she said. I can't believe that she's going to die. I know. I hadn't mentioned anything to Taylor about there being a possibility that Daphne might not die, because I didn't want to get her hopes up, in case it didn't work out. I'm sorry, Clarissa. I hope you don't mind if we skip lunch. I'm really not hungry. Me either, I told her. The meeting with Bryce's mom hadn't gone as well as I'd hoped, and a knot of worry continued to twist my stomach with anxiety. Unlike most weekends that were over too quickly, this one was excruciatingly slow. Nothing could distract me from my anxious thoughts until I received a text message from Damien on Sunday. Need to talk about Daphne. I'm at Byers Pond right now. I would have ignored him if he hadn't mentioned Daphne. She hadn't told me what this mysterious option was, but maybe she had shared it with him. I texted back that I would be there, and then I looked it up on my phone and found that it was fairly nearby in the metro parks. I debated calling Taylor and telling her that I was meeting Damien, but she would read more into it than there was. Besides, I hadn't even told her about Daphne having to make some kind of a choice that might save her life. My parents assumed that I was going over Taylor's house when I said I was going to see a friend, and I didn't bother with correcting them. Since it was a cold November day, there was nobody else at the pond. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard and saw that it was a few minutes before 1. Feeling agitated, I got out of the car to stand beside the pond, looking at the water. Maybe he'd had to go pee and had walked out of sight and would be right back. Turning when I heard footsteps, I was shocked to see Kristen. I couldn't believe he'd brought her with him, but after a moment I realized that Damien wasn't around anywhere. "You always fall for it," she smirked. "You sent the text?" At this point, I was only annoyed. There were still hours until the full moon, so she couldn't turn into the wolf yet. "Yep," she confirmed. I swiped his phone while he was taking a shower. He was getting ready for our date, but I'm more in the mood for some girl talk. "So this has nothing to do with Daphne," I said, feeling disappointed that I still wouldn't get to find out what was going on with her. "Not this, but I do hope that Damien will save her like I suggested. I was going to turn her myself, but I have to leave town before tonight now that Mama Mitchell is after me." "Turn her? Wait, turn her into a werewolf? The werewolf healing will cure her." "Wait," I repeated. "You want to save Daphne's life?" "Why wouldn't I?" Kristen asked in reply. "Daphne's a sweet person." "And your baby sister wasn't?" I questioned in disbelief. "Well, of course she was," Kristen explained like I was stupid. "It was nothing personal against the kid, but she was bad timing. My mom was finally getting ahead after my loser dad left her and skipped out on paying child support. She found a nice guy with a good job, and then she goes and gets pregnant after he marries her. And she was going to stop working and be a stay-at-home mom, too. We still wouldn't be able to afford all the stuff I wanted. Plus, I'd only get half my inheritance." I gaped at her. "Money? You killed a little baby because of money?" "You're an only child," she noted. "When have you ever had to share?" It was hard to grasp her level of selfishness. I didn't know if she qualified as a psychopath, but she had no qualms about eliminating anyone who stood in her way. Fortunately, she didn't appear to have a weapon with her, but I was on my guard and trying to anticipate any sudden movements. "I don't like to share," I agreed. "You're wrong if you think I want Damien, especially after he's been with you." She laughed in amusement. "Like I would care what you want. It's what he wants that's the problem. Do you know what he told me? He's not ready to have sex yet because he's too traumatized over Blair. Isn't that hilarious? He never even cared about her. She was just his fuck toy." Kristen laughed again at my expression. "You don't know him at all, do you? That's because he's been holding back, so you'll like him. He's reined it in for you. But that boy is an animal. And I don't mean just his wolf side. He used to reek of Blair's scent. It was all over him." She sighed with regret. "Too bad I won't get to experience that. Bryce is so repressed. He was always so concerned with going slow and being gentle. It took me forever to get him to have sex with me. But once I did, I knew he'd give me anything I wanted." I tried not to look happy about her revelation that she hadn't slept with Damien. "So you're leaving?" I asked. "Do you have anywhere to go?" "I'm thinking of paying my dad a visit," she said with a chilling smile. "That one will be personal." I knew that telling me her plans didn't bode well for me, but she still hadn't made any threatening moves. "Well, good luck with that. I'm freezing, so I've got to go now." "Yeah, I don't feel the cold as much as you do. That's one of the perks of being a werewolf. We also have superior smell and hearing, so I heard you guys talking at Damien's birthday party. Too bad you spilled the beans about my sister. I might have gotten some sex from him if he didn't know. It's been fun watching him struggle with his revulsion every time he has to kiss me, though." I took a step away from her and she tackled me to the ground. Werewolves have better speed and strength than regular humans, too, she informed me as I struggled against her iron grip on my wrists. Damien probably didn't tell you that because he didn't want you to be scared of him. I bet he'd love to have you in this position. I doubted she had any kinky intentions with me. What are you doing? I gasped. It's nothing personal against you, she assured me. But if I can't have what I want, then Damien can't have what he wants either. That would be you, she clarified in case I missed her point. There was suddenly all kinds of chaos that ended with two men pulling Kristen off of me. She screamed in rage and struggled, but she couldn't break free of them. Another man snapped a pair of handcuffs on her as the other two held her arms behind her back. "Stupid cops," she yelled. "I was just fooling around with my girlfriend." "We're not cops," one of the men told her. "They wouldn't know how to deal with a rogue wolf." "Clarissa," Damien shouted as he ran toward me. "Are you okay?" He extended his hand to help me up. "How'd you find me?" I asked. "They tracked her," he explained. "How'd you track my scent so fast?" Kristen questioned. One of the men snorted at that. "We put a tracking device on your car," another one said, as if it should be obvious to her. "Put a gag on her and get her to the van before someone sees her," Bryce's mom said as she joined the others. Kristen finally looked scared as they forced the gag into her mouth and dragged her away. "What are you going to do to her?" Damien asked the question that was on my mind. "I can tell all of you now that we've captured her," Mrs. Mitchell said. "Let's get out of here first. We can meet back at Bryce's apartment." She assumed that Damien was riding back with me and strode away, leaving us in awkward silence. Yeah. I gestured toward my car and walked toward it. Damien sat down in the passenger seat as I got in the driver's side. "Are you really okay?" "Yeah," I answered. Kristen has your phone." "I figured," he said. "As soon as I saw it was missing, I knew it had to be her, especially after what happened with Taylor's phone. I called Taylor and she gave me Bryce's number. His mom wanted me to wait for her team to bring you back, but I couldn't. I had to know that you were okay. She made me promise not to touch Kristen." His expression hardened. "I hope they kill her." I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from that deserted place. She said they wouldn't unless they had to. Maybe they're just going to keep her locked up somewhere. We were both silent for a while as I drove. Then I picked the safest subject, considering everything that Kristen had said to me. She told me about Daphne, about how you can save her. "She won't let me," he exclaimed. "She said yes, but then she changed her mind." "What? Why?" I asked in frustration. "I don't know." He sounded just as exasperated as I felt. "She called me yesterday and told me that she decided not to do it." Yesterday was when we met Bryce's mom. I had thought that Daphne was feeling sick after the meeting, but maybe she was just upset. "I think I know what happened. Bryce's mom was mad about him turning Kristen into a werewolf, and her turning you, and you know how sensitive Daphne is." "She's too damn considerate for her own good," he remarked. "Well, I'm not going to let her die just to spare someone's feelings." "You can't make the decision for her," I argued. "I'll talk to her and try to convince her." We didn't say much more before we arrived at Bryce's apartment. The only other thing we talked about was how Kristen was able to get into his house. I'd wondered aloud how she broke in and stole his phone. "She probably knows where we keep the spare key. I wouldn't be surprised if she's been stalking me ever since she became a werewolf, maybe even longer." It made sense, and it was a minor detail now anyway. "Maybe next time you get a text from someone wanting to see you, call to confirm it's them," he suggested in some semblance of his familiar playful tone. I didn't want to voice my thought that we weren't on friendly speaking on the phone terms. Yeah, good idea. It was a relief to arrive at the apartment and not be alone with Damien anymore. There was too much between us that wasn't right, and I didn't want to deal with any of it. Bryce answered the door, but Taylor was right behind him to throw her arms around me. "Don't ever go anywhere by yourself again," she admonished me. "Never," I agreed to placate her, knowing that would be an impossible promise to keep. Along with Bryce's mom, we were the only people there. "Where are those men who took Kristen?" I asked. "At a safe location," Mrs. Mitchell answered.
"Are you sure?"
Damien questioned.
"Tonight's the full moon, and if she escapes—"
"I'm aware of the danger," she interrupted sternly. "I told you we'd handle this. We didn't come here unprepared." "Yeah," I interjected. "You said you'd tell us what you're going to do to her." "Yes," she said. "Sit down, please, and I'll explain." We sat down and listened attentively as she talked about using a binding spell to trap Kristen in her wolf form. She'll never be able to revert back to her human self.
"What?"
Damien exploded.
"You'll just piss her off and make it easier for her to kill people."
"Give us a little credit," she demanded angrily. "We have a little more experience with this than you. Remaining a wolf will make that part overtake her human side. It'll take a little time, but she'll lose the ability to think like a human. All her human memories will fade from her mind." We all absorbed this information. It wouldn't actually be killing her, but "Kristen will be gone," Taylor said. "Like, she won't exist anymore." "Not as a person," Mrs. Mitchell confirmed. "But she'll be alive and living free in the wild."
"You're not going to keep her locked up?"
Damien asked with an unhappy expression.
"What if she changes back?"
"She won't," Mrs. Mitchell assured him. "We've used the binding spell before, and no one has changed back. Most have chosen to do it willingly, but we've had a few rogues in the past, too." "Then why did you say you might have to kill her?" I questioned. "We would have had to resort to that if we couldn't capture her alive," she answered. "Fortunately, she was too distracted by you to see us coming." She picked up a phone from the table and handed it to Damien. "I believe this is yours. My brother found it in her car. We wouldn't want the police to find it and suspect you. She will soon be a missing person."
"Willingly?"
Bryce asked.
"Who would do that willingly?"
"Some enjoy being the wolf more than being human," his mom told him.
"But to lose all your memories, I just can't even imagine forgetting everyone,"
he said. "We don't always understand the choices of others," she agreed.
"We want to be there when you do the spell on her,"
Damien declared. "She won't look any different," Mrs. Mitchell said. "She just won't change back into a human at dawn."
"I don't care,"
he insisted stubbornly.
"We want to be there."
"And Daphne too," I told her. "She's interested in spells." "The binding spell isn't to be used on a whim," she warned me. "This will be a serious loss to her family, and we don't undertake it lightly. Daphne would never try it herself. She knows how dangerous spells can be because her grandma has friends who practice magic," I explained. "But she's helped us with all of this since the beginning, and I don't want to leave her out now." Mrs. Mitchell considered it for a moment. "All right, but you have to follow our rules and stay quiet during the casting of the spell. We'll have to be there before nightfall, since most of us will turn." "Then who's going to do the spell?" I asked in alarm. "Not all of us are wolves," she replied. "We have some witches in our community, too."
"Maybe they could turn her into a toad,"
Damien suggested with a scowl.
"Then I could just step on her."
She regarded him speculatively. You shouldn't be there. Your emotions are too out of control.
No, please. I need to be there,
He pleaded in a contrite tone.
I'll follow your rules. I promise.
So we somehow convinced her to let us be there. It took place in a secluded cabin that I never knew existed so close to the city, but it was situated near a creek in the woods. The place would have been lovely for a weekend getaway, under different circumstances. Daphne looked around sadly. It's like a cottage from a fairy tale. I hadn't had a chance to talk to her about her decision yet. After this is over, Damien can help. She cut me off before I could finish my sentence. Damien's been through enough. But, I began. We don't decide who lives and who dies, she told me in a resolved tone. Look at where that's gotten Kristen. I tried again. But this is different. She fixed me with a determined look. We're not going against these people. I had no more time to argue with her, because we went inside with the rest of them and saw Kristen. She was sitting on the couch drinking a beverage, and her arms were no longer behind her back. The handcuffs were still on her wrists, but they had obviously been removed and replaced to allow her the use of her hands. Hey guys, come to rescue me? Kristen asked sarcastically. We've come to say goodbye, Daphne replied softly. Yeah, they tell me I'm moving to Wyoming, Kristen said. Don't worry though, I'll be back. They can't keep me prisoner forever. I can't wait until they all get arrested. None of us said anything, because we had been warned not to reveal anything about the spell. They wanted to keep her as calm as they could beforehand, just so they didn't have to deal with her hysterics. So you've finally got Damien, she taunted me. Good luck keeping him if you won't put out. He's not going to be able to go without sex too much longer.
Where's her gag?
Damien snarled. It's nothing to be ashamed of, babe, she continued. At least you're not a boring fuck like Bryce. One of the men who had pulled her off me at the pond pulled her head back by yanking her by the hair. Her mouth opened in protest, and he roughly shoved the gag in her mouth and secured it.
Thanks, Uncle Max,
Bryce said. He walked closer to Kristen and glared at her.
You've been given a rare gift, but you don't appreciate it. You've never appreciated anything or anybody in your life. Nobody will miss you, because you've never done one good thing for anyone in this world.
Daphne was the only one to speak to her after that. I wish things would have been different, and that you hadn't done those things. You could have been so much better than that. It shouldn't have ended this way, Chrissy. One of the men rolled a fairly large cage into the room, and Kristen screamed furiously behind the gag as they forced her into it. Place your hands by the bars so we can remove the cuffs, Bryce's mom instructed her. She complied, muttering curses behind the gag the entire time. You sick fuckers, she yelled after she removed the gag. You can't keep me in here. It's only for tonight, Mrs. Mitchell told her. We can't keep you restrained in handcuffs in your wolf form.
It's almost time,
Max said to his sister.
It's getting dark.
We'll be back after the change, Bryce's mom informed us. We, have to take off our clothes. What about my clothes? Kristen complained. I don't have any extra here. They ignored her as they scattered to different rooms out of our sight.
I'm going outside,
Damien told me.
Let me in after they come back.
Bryce had already left the room with his uncle, and Taylor, Daphne, and I were left alone with two women who were presumably the witches. One of them began to pour a powdery substance around the cage, while the other one lit 3 candles. Ooh, a spell, Kristen mocked them. Think it'll protect you from the big bad wolf? Trying to control me didn't work for Bryce, because I always find a way to do what I want. There's a spell for everything, and I'll find the counter spell for this one. The two women paid no attention to her as they sat down on the couch and held hands while staring at the candles on the coffee table. The rest of us were riveted by what was happening to Kristen. Her head was thrown back, and her eyes staring at the ceiling like she could see through it. Then her body began to contort as she sat on the floor of the cage with her knees pulled toward her torso. Her trance-like expression never changed, while her clothes ripped apart as her body both expanded and compacted in them. She was turning into a wolf right in front of us, and her human face disappeared as it formed into a wolf's snout and canine facial features. Now the gray wolf stood before us in the cage, and its eyes now focused on us with keen interest. The rest of the wolves bounded into the room and seemed to stand guard while the two women began to chant words that had no meaning to me. I remembered to go let Damien, who was now the black wolf, into the house. One of the white wolves in the room stood looking at Taylor. She glanced at me with a questioning look, and I nodded in confirmation that it was Bryce. The only thing that happened after the chanting ceased was that all the candles mysteriously snuffed out simultaneously. "It is done," one of the women said. Daphne walked up to the cage, stepping carefully over the powder on the floor. The gray wolf moved closer to her, and she reached through the bars to stroke its head. "Goodbye, Chrissy. You were a good friend, once." The wolf whined and nuzzled her arm as she continued to stroke its fur. Then it suddenly bared its fangs and bit her. Daphne screamed and hurtled back from it in shock. The other wolves growled and lunged toward the cage, sending it rolling across the floor to slam against the wall. "Stop!" I screamed, even though they were unable to force their way through the bars to get to Kristen. "She did a good thing. She finally did a good thing for someone." All the wolves turned their attention to me, but the black wolf paced back and forth in agitation. "I know you hate her, Damien," I told him, "but she just saved Daphne." I then explained to the rest of them that Daphne was dying from cancer and that Kristen had bitten her to save her life. I guess she was worried that Damien wouldn't do it. "I didn't ask her to do that, Mrs. Mitchell." Daphne's gaze moved around the wolves in confusion. I know you're here somewhere. But anyway, I told Damien that I didn't want him to turn me. I know you're upset, and I didn't want to make everything worse." "It's not your fault, sweetheart," one of the witches said. "They can't discuss with you now anyway." "What are you going to do with Kristen?" Daphne asked with a concerned glance back at the wolf in the cage. "Nothing," the other witch sighed. "It's already done. She won't be able to do any more harm now." "Go on home now," her friend urged. "There's nothing more to do here." We began to walk toward the door, but Daphne paused and turned back to call out to Kristen. "Thank you, Chrissy." The gray wolf howled in return, causing us all to look at her. The black wolf nudged me impatiently to open the door. He was the first one out as soon as I complied, and then he stood looking at his car. I laughed at his predicament. "Need a ride?" "I'll drive him," Daphne offered. "I always have my license with me just in case." "Do you know where his keys are?" I asked. He came bounding over to nudge me and trot a few paces before waiting expectantly for me to follow him. "We'll be right back," I told the girls. The black wolf led me to a spot behind some trees where his clothes were neatly folded in a pile on the ground. His jeans were on the bottom, and I fished in the pockets to find his keys. Then I carried the clothes to his car for him, and I handed Daphne his keys. "Are you okay?" I questioned, studying her with concern. "Yeah," she replied. "I don't know if it's all in my mind, but I think I'm already feeling better, like I have a little more energy." "Well, I'm tired," Taylor declared. "It's still early, but it feels like it's midnight." "It's been a long day," I agreed. Then something occurred to me. "How will you get home from Damien's house? Do you want me to pick you up after I drop off Taylor?" "Thanks, but my mom can get me," Daphne said. I was relieved, because I couldn't wait to get home. My parents still thought I was at Taylor's house. Fortunately, it got dark early this late in the year, so it was only 7:30 in the evening. She's going to be one of them now? Taylor asked me as we drove away from the cabin. Yes, I confirmed. It'll probably cure her. At least we hope it will. Wow, she breathed softly. That was so freaky, she exclaimed 2 seconds later. The way she turned into the wolf like that. I can't believe that that it happens to him every month. I know, I said. And all of them. I wasn't quite sure why I'd stopped myself from speaking his name. Taylor shuddered. I wouldn't want that to happen to me. I wondered then if she and Bryce would be able to sustain their relationship. There were more thoughts, more doubts lurking at the back of my mind after this seemingly endless day, but I was somehow able to push them deep and not think about them after I closed my blinds to block out the sight of the moon through my window. I then escaped into sleep for a while.